All right, another episode of The Workplace Wanderer. I'm having so much fun doing this podcast, LinkedIn Live, whatever you want to call it. It is available as a podcast, usually a couple weeks after we record the live. I try to put it up. We're all everywhere you can find your podcast, but it's just been so much fun for me doing uh, this podcast and having conversations with people from all over the country and the world, talking about a topic that means a lot to me. And I've really had just a profound experience of learning. And it's just been so exciting for me. So today I have another great guest, Andrea Parker, and our topic today is recruiting and retaining diversity, which I'm so pumped to dive into, which I'll get into. I already told Andrea, but I'll get into why. And Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Blake. Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor and just a pleasure to be here with you all today. And I can't wait for us to converse.
Yeah, same here. So if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about yourself, what brought you to what you're doing today, and why is this topic so important to you?
Sure. I'll try to be brief. Feel free to stop me if I go on too long. So I was actually a classroom educator for 15 years. I taught us everything that you can teach in the humanities, economics, political science, history. I taught mostly EL, so English language learners and multilingual learners. And students with disabilities, but in a private international school. So we did not have the luxury of adjustment counselors, special educators, and that sort of thing. So that is my background. I currently am working in the field, kind of across the fields of child welfare and special education. I am a project director at a nonprofit in the Boston area, and I also run my own consulting practice, where we provide coaching and strategic planning for equitable family and community engagement.
Wow. So you are very busy, it sounds like.
Very busy, yes. And I'm about to I'm about to start running one of the 21st Century Community Learning Centers for the Uxbridge Public Schools. So very busy, yes.
What is 21st Century Community Learning? Is that a brand name or is that a concept?
It's actually a grant through the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And so different, any district can apply for these funds. And if they get them, they're for after school programming to close the achievement gap and provide social emotional learning spaces.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
And so to me, it seems a little bit obvious in connecting the dots, but what is this topic? I always ask people, what do you want to talk about when you come on the show? What is an area that means a lot to you? And your response was recruiting and retaining diversity. What is it about that topic that speaks to you? And how does it show up in your daily life?
That's such a great question. And I love the segue there, because at the early part of my career, even though I worked at an international school, it really was very homogeneous, very similar social economics of, both students and staff and backgrounds of people, very similar race and ethnicities and spiritual backgrounds, geographic. It was an island, so everyone was, living on this same island. And when I moved to Boston in 2017 and began my graduate studies at Harvard Graduate School of Education, I took a class called Reimagining Integrated, Diverse, and Equitable Schools with Dr. Lee Title and Dr. Darnisa Amante, two rock stars in the field of DEI. And I really, not to be cliche, but I really became woke. I was very awakened to how much diversity matters, and how we can't. I decided to actually describe myself on LinkedIn as a Jebi warrior or person. And I intentionally leave diversity out of that, because when I say Jebi, GEBI, so you notice that you have the justice, equity, belonging, and inclusion, but I leave the diversity out. For me, it's intentional, it's given, and workplaces are by nature diverse. Mm-hmm. In this country and in large cities, workplaces are diverse. Different genders, different gender identities, people coming from all over the state, even other states, different spiritual practices, races, ethnicities. disabilities or different abilities and superpowers.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't make it necessarily, it makes it better, but it doesn't make it easier to work together. And I'll give you a few examples. Throughout my career, I've worked with autistic people. I have recruited and trained people with both physical, visible, and invisible disabilities. And the person that we're recruiting or hiring is good. Like they know how to adapt. It's the rest of the workers that don't know how to adapt with them. And
Yes.
so, if you've never worked with someone who's autistic before, I think we have to take a step back in humility and ask questions first to people who have worked with autistic individuals, ask the right questions to HR, and as we begin to develop relationships with our coworkers who have different abilities, questions to them as well. For example, to a person of color, you might, as you develop a relationship, say, do you prefer to be referred to as a Black person or a person of color? That's a humble question to ask.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you consider yourself a person? Do you identify as a person with a disability? Some people with disabilities do absolutely want to be named and labeled as a person with a disability. And we had a keynote speaker who felt that way, where she says, I'm blind, and that creates a disability for me. So no, I don't want to be called someone who has a superpower or has super abilities. I have a disability in this world, and that's that I can't see.
Right.
But other people have, just really, don't like to identify as somebody with a disability as opposed to somebody with neurodivergence or with neurodiversity.
Sure.
So when I say recruiting and retaining, we have to build a culture and environment where diverse people, as I've just defined them, want to come and work. And then most importantly, we have to create and sustain that environment where they want to stay and where they see themselves with opportunity for promotion if that's what they're looking for, that they're not being left out of promotion.
And those are two very different issues that are very much intertwined, but it does take a very strong effort to not just attract those people, but then also, like in the title, retain those people and help them feel like as if they belong, and then also help them not just feel as if they belong, but also feel as if they're making an important contribution to the workplace that they're within, the organization that they're working for, and making sure that their voices are heard. So yeah, there's just so much to unpack with what you've said. And I sometimes this might sound obvious, especially for somebody who works in this field, but the most important thing, and that I'm hearing at the very base levels when we discuss diversity, I think people often think of just like the main, and we've brought this up on the past couple episodes actually, but diversity, people almost always assume that has to do with either race, gender, or sexual orientation or gender identity. And there's so many deeper layers that go into that, and including the neurodiversity, intellectual disabilities, really, you can just, the list can go on, but it really is just what makes us different from the person next to us, which the truth is, of course, we all have our own versions. We all have our backgrounds and stories. It's just really learning to adapt environments and hiring, so that we can embrace those differences.
I love that you mentioned story, because I had unintentionally left that out. And it was something that I learned through this course I mentioned at Harvard, the importance of story. And there's actually a school district in Massachusetts that has this as their vision, mission for their students and for their staff, is know our students by name, by story, and by strength. And this is Chelsea Public Schools. They do such an amazing job at integrating that into people, because I do want to push back on one thing. I heard you say a couple of times the word help, and I always try to think very carefully when I'm going to use the word help, and I catch myself using it too, because it almost, I feel like sometimes we're taking the power away from someone when we say, I'm going to help you feel like you belong, right? It's more, because that, I guess I wonder if that puts us in a position as well, I have the power to help you feel like you belong, where it's really like, what makes you belong, Blake? In what type of environments have you really felt like you belonged? And then in what type of environments have you not? Okay, let's see what conditions we can create in this workplace so that you felt like you did that in that place and even better.
That's true. And I think you bring up a good point. And again, this is where we all look at our own personal biases and our backgrounds and our stories of how we shape and see the world around us. For me, help, I work in mental health, and we talk about people needing to reach out for help. You're in a position where you're struggling, and help is it's called a helping profession. So it shapes the way that sometimes I see the world as somebody who is, has an issue or has a concern that they're looking to overcome, or maybe different, and they're looking for help in belonging. But I also see, as I'm learning more and more, that term can also, like you just said, I think it's a very powerful way you put it, is it implies a power differential.
Right, like a disempowering, right? That's not that's not the intention, right? But it can be the impact. And that's something that I also really say a lot to my staff, is we can have very, very good intentions, and almost all people do all the time. And the impact of our words or our actions can be very different. And when working with diverse people and hoping to retain and sustain and promote them, it's really important to acknowledge that. And the other thing you said that I'll just, without making this about me, I will say, you can see I'm a white woman, I am heterosexual, and I have applied for umpteen. I cannot even tell you how many roles of director of diversity, equity, and inclusion I have applied for. Never gotten a call back. Sure. And it's disappointing, because there is a space. There's space for everybody in this work, right? And particularly when the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging really needs to be done by white, middle class, and above, and better off, middle class and above, better off white men and women. There is a space for white heterosexual men and women in this work to create environments that don't feel too threatening or scary. And that we also don't put the burden of the work on the LGBTQ plus community, on the Black and Brown community, right? Because they're not the people that need to do the work. They know what oppression they suffer every day, right? It's the rest of us that need to do the work. And so I find it interesting, because what you don't see when you look at me is that I speak 5 languages, that I have 2 multiracial children, that I lived in another country as an illegal immigrant for 2 years, and then as a legal working immigrant for 18 years, that I myself suffer a struggle with anxiety. My children both have diagnosis of anxiety as well. These are all the things that one doesn't know until we share our stories and our journeys, and given that opportunity to say, this is what I can bring to the workplace, because this is my story. This is my name, my story, my strength. And my strength is connecting people, or my strength is having empathy, or my strength is building empathy in others, right? Compassion. And, there's so much turnover in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And that's probably a whole nother podcast, but
well, I think we saw too, almost like a mass layoff of that position as the financial market started to crash. It was almost the first one to go.
Layoffs, but also quitting, right? People left. People aren't going to put up with crap,
Well, and a lot of that is also because, and it's almost more towards the point I was going to with that, is that a lot of leadership brought on that role. Higher up leadership brought on that role as more of a box to check. This is my belief, and I'm not attacking anybody. This is just my own personal opinion. But it brought on people to check a box and never really understood the value of it, or even the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a massive business case
There's
there.
a
It's
massive.
not just about a social movement or being woke. It's actually extraordinarily beneficial in terms of productivity, creativity, innovation, collaboration. I mean, there's so many
higher
different
profits.
areas.
Higher
Yeah.
profits. Like if that's what's going to get people, that is fact. And there's tons of studies out of Harvard Business School, right, with the financial benefits from diversity. Absolutely.
I'm laughing because it's okay. So part of the reason why I was excited to talk about this today is that it could not be more appropriate, as I'm deep in the weeds of writing a paper, which is our first assignment for one of our classes. That is an assessment of the Shell Corporation's diversity and inclusion program and how they rolled it out, and then some of the specific issues that they dealt with as of 2010. So it's a little bit on the older side, but so it's just interesting because a huge part of that is about hiring, and then a huge part of that is about retaining. And then they're in the middle of a restructuring process in the 2010 period, and sort of the problem that's posed to us as potential consultants in this case is, okay, the company has to restructure. Should DE&I initiatives be put on hold for that restructuring, or should they be a part of that restructuring? And it kind of speaks to the point that we were just making is like, are you looking to truly have an inclusive environment, or are you looking to check a box? And that it shows, it builds a ton of trust. Depending on how you go, you can either build trust or lose trust, depending on how you approach that situation. So it's interesting as I'm evaluating it and reading all of these articles that a lot of them are from Harvard Business School. So that's again why I'm laughing, is that I'm like I'm just reading all of these articles.
Yeah.
Right, so it's really interesting.
And again, I'll just acknowledge my own bias. You know, when someone puts that question to me, my initial answer, of course, without having the case and the data, is, oh, it absolutely has to be a part of the restructuring. Like leaving it out would just, make a big statement and cause a lot of damage and set things back. Mm-hmm. I would say, if they've already been engaged in that work. And at the same time, I think you're right. And it just requires asking more questions of leadership. Well, what is it exactly that you're trying to do? Tell me more about your vision for an inclusive workplace. Do you have a vision for an inclusive workplace, right? Because that will help us understand, what recommendation we want to make here, and then to have a case for that recommendation. Right. But it is a shame that oftentimes, it's a bit more than a shame. It's not even the right word. It's an understatement. DEI can't be a department, right? Like, it often lives in HR. And that's what we found here at the nonprofit where I work, that's where it would live. But it really has to be integrated across everything. Mm-hmm. Another example here, we had a 5-year grant for family engagement, a federally funded family engagement project. And after the 5 years, we didn't get renewed, but not because we didn't do a good job, but because we had actually done a very good job, and it was determined that other states needed the funding more. And so what we're doing is, like, we're just going to stop doing family engagement. It's going to be woven into all the other projects and all the other things. And that is equitable, right?
Yes.
When you're taking DEI, DEIB, DEIJ, the letters aren't so significant as is what are we actually doing? It's not just an HR movement issue. It's not just a social justice issue. It's woven in through finance, through human resources, through all of our products and projects and customers, and the relationships we have with people, and where we choose to invest or contribute. Right. Invest in the case of businesses that will then invest in socially just minded projects in the community.
You've made a ton of great points, and I guess what stands out to me, and I'm always trying on this to make sure I'm speaking from the heart and being honest with my perceptions and kind of speaking them out loud so we can address. And for me, of course, I am new to this discussion. I mean, I've done some diversity and inclusion work regarding like creating recovery friendly workplaces. You know, I'm
Love
somebody
that.
who's
I
in.
love that.
Thank you. And I'm somebody who's in recovery from my own personal substance use disorder, come from a family that's been affected by substance use disorders for quite some time.
Thank you for sharing.
And thank you for saying thank you. It's my pleasure. And so I've done some work in that area. And I think what I've seen, if I'm speaking from my own personal experience, is a bit of surprise and shock from leadership teams when they find out that it requires kind of a total system overhaul. And I think that's where the breakdown happens. And again, this is opinion based on my limited knowledge, but that's where I brought in education and then offered systems that can help support those who are struggling with substance use disorders, one, and two, support those who are in recovery from a substance use disorder and help them feel more included. But after the education piece that I do, where I come in and talk to the employees and talk to the teams and leaders, it typically stops there for a lot of people because they realize that there is a lot of work that goes into creating an inclusive workplace and helping people to feel like they belong. And it's not always easy. And more importantly, it's not always comfortable.
Those are such great points. And I would say, as someone who's just recently getting into this work, I applaud and admire, the commitment that you have and also the insights that you've been able to develop, over the short course of time that you've been involved in this work. And you're absolutely right. I think you're right. There is, always a will to say, oh, let's bring in this $10,000 or $20,000 speaker. And, oh, let's bring in this consultant and they can, since they're, well-versed in this, they can definitely get our staff on board. And then the consultant leaves, right? And then the work fizzles out. And these are all things that happen. And then folks, particularly senior leadership, do begin to realize it is hard work. It's costly, both in bandwidth. It's emotional work and it's intellectual work, right? Like there's a lot of bandwidth that is required. And, at the nonprofit where I work, it's not even a department or role or position. It's kind of developed as a committee, right? And that's something. It's better than nothing.
Sure.
And it doesn't really do justice to the work at hand, right? There's a lot of conversations that need to be had. There's a lot of spaces that need to be created. Then there's post conversations after that. Then there's metrics and measurements. There's audits that need to happen. There's action steps that come out of those audits. It's work that's never done, but it's work that's measurable, right?
Sure.
We can measure over time people's self-reported feeling of inclusiveness in their workplace. We can capture qualitative data about what people say during a microaggression or how HR follows up and facilitates a restorative conversation. We can capture all of that information, but the company, the people that work, the senior leadership and everybody involved and every staff member needs to be bought into the idea that it's not comfortable. And you will get called out, and I always say there's spaces for calling in, right? When we're just getting started, or we know we have a new staff, or we have someone who's incredibly uncomfortable. There's space for calling in, right? But when we've been at the work for some time and we've established some basics, like language is not neutral. When something is said and it's sounding, biased, we're going to dig in. We're going to say more about that, right? And it's not to put you on the spot. It's so we can all hear your thinking and we can be sure we understand what you're saying. And if it still seems like something biased, we're going to talk about it, right? Because we all have our biases. No one's an expert. No one's an expert. But what needs to stop is that the oppressed, the people of color, the LGBTQ community, the people of minority religions or immigration status. I know I hesitate to name because I know I'm missing people, but what needs to stop is the underserved, the underprivileged keep paying the toll for for these circumstances that lead to oppression, that lead to microaggressions, that lead to not being able to get out of the vicious circle of poverty and substance abuse and mental health issues. I was coaching a young woman the other day, who's a concierge in a large building, and she was kind of up to here, and she's a young Black woman, 19 years old, and she's like, I just can't get treated like people treat me one more day. And I said, you're right. Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. You are first. Now, if we continued in our coaching relationship, we'd also be talking about how it's not just here at this place, it's everywhere. You got to build the resilience and the skills and protect yourself.
Yeah.
Create those boundaries so that people don't have access to harm you and abuse you in that way, because they'll try, right? But yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And
it is a lot.
Right. That when people realize it's like, oh, wow, that could cause a lawsuit. Oh, gosh, I could really lose my job for that. Then all the fear starts coming in. Right. And you have to almost address that head front, front and center, to be like, we're not going to be having lawsuits about this.
Right. Yeah. You have to create I think above all else, before you even begin to address these types of uncomfortable conversations, you got to create a place of safety, kind of like a social contract within your workplace of understanding that we're all here to support each other and learn from each other and build relationships. And so we need to create a safe space where we can understand that no one's here trying to do any harm to each other, but we're trying to learn from each other so that we can collaborate better. We can understand your background so that we can come together and be innovative and creative and productive at work. I want to point this out because I think it's important as a white, straight man to point something out here of a bias that I just had, that I had to check myself on, that I've learned to check myself on, because it's actually a mistake I've made in the past, where I was going to initially say, prior to what I just said, was that everyone needs to learn to trust each other at work, and then we could start having these difficult conversations, which is true. However, that's a lot easier for me to say as a white straight man who hasn't had society challenge them nearly as much, I haven't had my trust betrayed nearly as much as many of the other cultures have, or cultures, backgrounds, whatever it may be. So it's a lot easier for me to say and to recognize that it's people's trust develop on different timelines as well. So this isn't a process where you just say, well, we started our D&I initiative and things are going great now. Everyone trusts each other and it's working well. No, you even said it you can measure it over time. This is a long process of building community within an organization.
Absolutely. And as somebody who I came into an organization that's been around since the mid 70s, and I came in 2020. So, and initiated this, this DEI work. And so I definitely experienced there is so much distrust. Right. And so just to give the audience here, maybe some tidbits, some of the steps that I took that worked were, wow, I had no idea that happened to you. I am so sorry that happened to you. So sorry. And, really connecting with the person authentically and working hard at building that relationship. Maybe check in with them. When I'm saying it's someone who you feel has trust issues, rightly so, been let down, been disappointed, been abused, etc. It's somebody that it will take time to build that trust. And maybe you're sending a text message or email just to check in once a week. Hey, how you doing today? Hey, you want to grab some coffee today? Because what really matters to people who have lost trust with reason is a recognition that there was harm, right? And this is the restorative practice I like to use. There was harm caused. If we have a chance to restore that harm, like if the harm is caused now, then we can have a restorative conversation where we speak to both people before the conversation, get consent to have the conversation, get consent with the person, that both people or the group of people are comfortable with who's going to mediate the conversation, the person, the name, the first and last name of that person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that they all know the questions ahead of time, and they're very simple. What happened? What exactly happened? Oh, well, so-and-so called me, or so-and-so said this, or so-and-so sent me this email 3 times. And, they thought they were accusing me of not getting X, Y, Z thing done. And okay, each person shares what happened. Who was harmed? Like, who suffered harm? With
Right.
one organization, I ran into a snag with this, where the people, that word harm just wouldn't fly. We couldn't use that. We had to use something different, because harm had that kind of legal, right? It was like, oh gosh, I'm going to go to court for this. So
right.
Who was harmed, right? And finally, what needs to happen now, right? Like, here's an opportunity for apology, and for saying the time or space or whatever else we need to move on and continue working together, or to continue the project that we're doing together. So I think those are very powerful things to remember, just to leave folks with a little bit of a tidbit, right? There are 3 very simple questions that we can ask, but we do need consent from the people involved, because nobody's forced to have that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Right. And
that's such great points.
Everyone gets the questions ahead of time, and we agree on the facilitator and that sort of thing. Because we're human beings. Sometimes we forget we're go, 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 go. We're human beings. We are, and I'm not a clinic. You're a clinician, right, Blake? I believe you were a clinician.
Yeah.
So I don't have that clinical background. And what I do know from my work in education is that we're human beings, and we have feelings. We feel some kind of way about some kind of thing, right? And that some kind of way may be it is justified within us, but it might not. It might be something that's impacting our work, and that's another thing I'm sure as a mental health practitioner. It's that when something bad happens to us, it's not our fault. When we suffer trauma, complex trauma, developmental trauma, it's never our fault, but it is our responsibility to heal. To heal, right. So that we don't continue projecting that harm on other people.
Sure. It makes so much sense. And before we continue, I just want to say hi to Amanda Marino, who's in the chat, Dr. Ian Rudell, who is one of the professors, and I don't want to butcher his title or specifically what he does, but at William James College, he's in charge of the diversity, equity, and inclusion path. I don't know, the words slipping my mind, but basically the specialty area that you can study within the PsyD program and the master's level program. He's in charge of that program within it. So I've learned a lot from him already, and actually just watched one of his presentations yesterday. And a big area he focuses on is enabling people to have difficult conversations. And
it's a skill.
It's a skill. It's a skill, and we have to be.
It's an art. It could be an art. I mean, even so much of a skill, it's an art, right? It's something that has to be very well crafted, very well thought out, very well coached.
I'll take it even further. It's an art. It's a dance.
I love that.
And it's a dance with ourselves. It's a dance with somebody else. It's knowing when to lead and when to be led. I think it's so intricate and requires so much mindfulness, almost as if you're listening to the music in the dance and going with the beat and moving with the sound. You have to be really in tune with the moment and be really in tune with your emotions, of where your biases are coming up. If you're getting uncomfortable, if you're getting angry, where is that coming from? Is your ego being challenged? Is there someone yelling at you in the back of your head in your subconscious when you were a child you're hearing again? Where is that coming from? What surprised me, I think, the most about the diversity inclusion, and sort of where to start with it, is understanding ourselves more than anything. And to me, I guess the stereotype of it, or just understanding what it might be in a concept, jumps right to empathy, right? I need to understand other people's experiences better. But in order to get there and develop that type of empathy, it requires an understanding of myself first, and the many different lenses that I see the world through first, so that I can begin to understand what other people are seeing. So I can understand that my background, my past, my mental health experiences, my whatever it may be, is coloring the reality right now. And if I can remove that for a moment, I can also understand and see somebody else's through somebody else's lens for a moment.
I love that. I love the idea of a dance, and also the colored lenses, right? That we do see. We can see things through rose-colored lenses. We can see things through darker lenses. We can see the world through sunshine lenses, right? And our experiences absolutely do shape how we see the world and how we show up in our roles. Our comfort level with discomfort. And I know that was also a part of that was a part of my journey. Like I said, in 2017, in this course I took, it was all let's explore what our upbringing was like. And we were a group of 10 students, Black and white, some raised in the South, some raised in the Northeast, some on the West Coast, some Asian identifying, African American identifying, white identifying, all different genders. And we all examined, right, our upbringing and the things that we heard people say, the things that we saw people do, the housing experiences that we had, the schooling experiences, the types of schools that we had access to, the social networks that we had or did not have access to, and our college experiences, and everything that really led up to who we are, to our identity, right? And how we show up in our work. Absolutely.
It's such a cool experience, and it makes so much sense. I keep thinking about, in terms of understanding our own perspectives, and also understanding, I think important is our own emotional state. Understanding what's emotional state we're in. And I'm an imagery person, right? Like, I need to compare it to things or scenes that I've been in life, or create. There's a lot of people on LinkedIn who I know who are in recovery or some type of recovery process from a substance use disorder. And I think about sometimes in terms of, this is a very specific example, but in the program that I work, the community support program that I maintain my recovery within, sometimes people who are in the program will share a vulnerable part, where they're at in their recovery. And afterwards, people will say, keep coming back. And I've heard from multiple people at the same time, different understandings of keep coming back. Some people hear it as keep coming back as almost like the Southern version of bless your heart, like kind of just saying like F you, like you're a little bit screwed up for me. And other people here keep coming back as a welcome. At the same time, the same person said it, the same person, but just different people heard it. So again, like, that's how these little examples of understanding that just our experience doesn't define the reality for somebody else. And it does require that inquisitive mind, and us being willing to collaborate, as you were in the class you were talking about, collaborate and understand each other's experiences.
Absolutely. I love that example. I would have never understood that first, connotation or understanding of those words, keep coming back. So that's a thank you for educating me in that's something I never heard before. And thank you so much for sharing your recovery journey, Blake. And I wish you so well on that, and congratulate definitely the work that you're doing, because it's not easy. It's
not easy, but it gets easier, is what I'll say.
And it sounds like you have great supports as well. And it's significant when as you say, somebody shares something really personal and really vulnerable, and a great way to respond to that I'm thinking back to the class I took of the 10 students, or in this recovery circles. It's like, thank you for sharing that. You didn't have to open up in that way. And we know it's not without personal risk. Somebody said that to me once. I ended up just spontaneously holding space and facilitating a conversation a couple of weeks ago at a staff appreciation event. And I didn't know I was going to be doing it. And at the end, I was, holding space for 2 hours unexpectedly. And a colleague said to me afterwards, she said, it's not without personal risk doing something like that.
What a profound statement. That's so simple, but so true.
It made me feel so valued and appreciated because, the context was the staff appreciation. The activity was the oral out loud reading of Frederick Douglass's 1852 speech. And so, there are a lot of, as you speak about feelings, there are a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions, a lot of hard things for people to read, and also a realization that some of what was said, a lot of what was said in that speech in 1852 is still happening today. It might not be slavery, but it is the criminal justice system. It is the child welfare system. And so hearing somebody say after that, because I don't know if I did a good job or a poor job or an okay job, but I know that we made it happen and we held the space and everybody read and everybody reflected. And to hear a colleague say after that, it's not without personal risk. It really was a powerful thing to hear.
God, I love that. That's such a profound statement. I love that. And it highlights the vulnerability in
And
this.
like you said, at the same time, that might mean nothing to somebody else, right? To me, that meant a lot.
Yeah.
But, and she knows me, right? Like she probably felt like that was the right thing to say. But somebody else might have needed to hear something completely different, right?
And speaking of personal risk, I also want to thank you for what you shared earlier about all the, you said that people they see you they see on the surface, right? They see who you are on the surface, but then you had all of this, the 5 languages, you were an illegal immigrant somewhere, you deal with anxiety. I mean, I thank you for sharing that, and I also trying to be in tune with my own emotional state. I immediately felt warmed up to you. And your vulnerability immediately makes me feel closer. It makes it feel as if you're easier to speak to in that way. But I think that highlights an important point outside of making me comfortable, which thank you for that. Because it reminds me that we all struggle. We all have our different anxieties and different backgrounds. It speaks to the power on a general level of vulnerability and opening up to other people and what that means. And what that gives space for. And it's not without personal risk. You took a risk there, as you don't know my background, and I could have judged you for being an illegal immigrant. I could be very against that for some reason. And there was personal risk there, but that personal risk led to deeper conversation and feelings of warmth and comfort and connection.
I really, really appreciate hearing that, because I didn't actually think about any of the personal risk when I said that. It's just part of my story. But I appreciate you saying that. And, certainly when I introduce myself in spaces where I know I'm going to be facilitating the work of DEI and there will be people of color present, I always lead with some things that I've learned. I've learned that I know, I've learned that I've experienced. And that is that, yes, it's these holding multiple truths. Like, yes, I grew up in a 2-parent household in suburban Lancaster County, and I went to a well-funded suburban public school. And while all of that is true, and that gives me great privilege, and as I also said before, I also went to Harvard. That is also great privilege. What I will follow that up with is that as an 8th grader, I was living by myself. My parents owned a restaurant. They were never home. I had a ton of freedom. Not a good thing for a 14-year-old. And when I was in college, I learned about the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences that my dad had multiple, I want to say 6 or 7 of the total 8 or 10 ACEs.
At the top of my head, yeah, I think so. I'm not sure.
So let's say he's had of all the ACEs one can experience, adverse childhood experiences, he had, like 70 to 80% of
Yeah.
them. And when I went away to school, again, this is at a time my parents owned a restaurant, then the restaurant failed and closed, and my parents' income was zero when I went to college, like no income. So I had to kind of make things happen in college, worked all the way through college, worked all the way through graduate school. And at the same time, my dad had fallen into alcoholism and actually passed at age 60 in 2010. And so now I reflect on what his state was when he was raising 3 children, and how that may have impacted us. Particularly my eldest brother, because he was the first child,
Yeah.
and particularly me being the youngest, like they were done. When I was 14, they're like, yeah, we're going to go open our restaurant.
Right.
And so that's a big part too, right? Like I've been through some stuff.
Yeah.
And that's not even to mention, stuff that I've experienced as a single, I wasn't young as a mother, as a single parent. I won't even get into that. Right. But I've lived some stuff. Right. Like I'm not a homeowner. I don't have a chunk of cash in the bank. That actually differentiates me from the rest of the leadership team where I work. Right. Like generally people in executive positions do have some savings, do own a home. Right. That's not my situation.
Right.
I see things with a different lens. I experience housing insecurity. I know what that feels like.
Thank you, first of all, for all that vulnerability. I mean, yeah, and again, it humanizes the experience, and it reminds us all again that just because we have certain beliefs about an executive position, or a certain belief about a certain type of person, or even a certain type of person with certain privileges, you used even the word, you said, I have these privileges, and there is a human being behind that as well, who's had life experience. And I love that. I love the way that you put all of that.
And I will follow that up with, I have never been made to feel less because of the color of my skin or because of my sexual identity.
Right.
I have been made to feel less as a woman, that I will say, but I've never been made to feel less because of the color of my skin. And I cannot know what that feels like.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and again, another important distinction to make. It's an understanding that I also don't know what it's like in somebody else's shoes, and I'm willing to learn. It's not a comparing apples to apples. It's nothing like that, where no one's trying to say, just because I've experienced things, it doesn't mean I'm the same as you. You've had your own experiences that have shaped you, who you are, into who you are.
I love this conversation. I can't wait to hear and see what people will do with this, because
yeah, I'm excited too. No, and you're providing so much insight. I mean, sometimes if you catch me looking off and kind of just staring off, it's because I'm so deep in thought, and just you've challenged beliefs in me, and you've opened up doors for me and my perspectives.
I'm so glad. And tying it back a little bit to our theme here, like there are a lot of people. I actually I think I got a job offer once recently, which I had to turn down, because of what I shared with the organization. I shared my perspective of compassion and compassionate. I believe this is not my term; it's someone else's term. And I wish I could put my finger on the name because I want to give credit. But this compassionate accountability of, like, there's grace and there's space, and there's also, accountability and respect, and getting the job done. But I think the reason I was given the offer was made was because it's important to know how to hold those two things, and to balance, right? The compassion, we're human beings, and we also need to get the job done. So we need to communicate when we can, and we need to speak up and say what we need. Like, these are all factors that help to recruit and retain diverse staff, because it's not like, oh, I made one mistake, I'm going to be fired. oh no, I need to actually recognize that I made that mistake, and also recognize that I didn't ask for help, and do better the next time, and just know that there's grace for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Providing the space for that healing. It's, again, ringing all these bells of these
Right.
articles that are just whirring through my mind. Like, I'm like, it's,
Right.
I swear,
And
I've
I
read more this month than I have in my entire life.
love
And
it.
it's like I'm seeing words when I close my eyes. But one of the articles I was reading late last night was about the dichotomy of creating a diverse workplace, of where, in one sense, it requires structure, and the other sense, it requires maneuverability and improvisation in how conversations and communication flows. So it's like there's a constant need for balance in creating these environments.
And that there's people, if you think of a 300 or million, I don't know, tens of thousands person company, that there's people who need and function really well in structure. And there's people who really resent the structure and want the space and the creativity. We're all working within the same spaces and the same managers and the same HR system.
Yeah.
So that's an absolute truth.
Well, and then the other part of it too that they mentioned that goes right along with it, that's just as like, it's like I was going to use a bad word, but I'm not. So it's mind boggling. I know, but I just don't want to do it on LinkedIn. It's a bit mind boggling to try to wrap your head around, where it says, okay, you need to create a supportive environment that's also a challenging environment. So it's like, there's just this constant balance of being able to challenge each other's beliefs, but also being able to support those challenges, or support people after they've made mistakes, or after there's been a mistake done to them. It's just so interesting.
It really
the
is,
balance
and
of the stakes.
it really is, and in most cases, there has to be a will upon the person. Like, a lot of people, I think maybe even majority of people will shut down just completely, just cut off communicate, given the opportunity, shut down, cut off the communication, just be like, I'm just not going to deal with that. Right? That's the kind of the default, the human default. I don't know. Maybe I'm off base there.
No, I
But
don't think you
creating a
are.
culture to do the opposite, right? To really talk
Yeah.
about things and open up about things. And I think that's when we realize, like, I've worked with people who I feel like have workplace trauma. Like, they've worked in 5 places before they come here, and I see how they respond in certain situations. And I'm like, whoa, they must have had some really bad experiences in the past. So I will say things like, on this team, we value trust, we value honesty, we value and respect each other's space. So just know that you can always, say what you need. You can always speak, say what you need, or say when something bothers you, and no one's going to get offended. But the one non-negotiable is honesty, right? Like,
I love that. And it's allowing values to drive the relationships in the organization, and it's the values you can always fall back on. I love that. And that's important. And then, of course, it matters what you do afterwards. After we state those values, it's how do we model those values? And it's tough. And that's another piece you brought, like, about people with workplace trauma, regardless of your background or what it may be. Who knows what the experience was? But that's another thing that we have to consider when building these trustworthy environments and safe environments, that some people are coming in very cautious, and they may have had some past experiences. They're going to take even longer because of those experiences. Maybe they asked a question. They were trying to be open with somebody and asked a question, and the person took it wrong, and they ended up losing their job because of it.
Exactly. And let's remember that data is misused. There was a period, there was the statement we'll hear, like, bring your whole self to work, right? And take the what are these assessments, the personality tests, as as part of right. So we can all figure out who's got which strengths, and we can work together as a team. And then sometimes that data is used in ways that it shouldn't be. So that's important to consider as well, right? That it's important. It's a good goal to bring our whole selves to work, but we have to really feel a lot of, everyone has to feel trust in order to want to do that. And I think the jury's out on whether that's actually a good thing or not. To bring your whole self to work.
It all depends on, that's been driving home multiple times in the last month. It's context, context, context.
Yes.
Every situation, every moment that you're dealing with requires a different approach.
Absolutely. And that takes me back. A class I took at Harvard. It was learning leadership and entrepreneurship, taught by Dr. Monica Higgins and Uche Amachi. Hope I did not butcher his name. Every class was on a case, right? And we would study a case, and every case was different, right? Like we did a case on Boston Children's Hospital, on climbing Mount Everest, on Taco Bell, on all these different places, businesses. But at the end of the day, it's what you just said. It's the context. Who was the leader, right? What was happening? What was not happening? Who was involved? What was the location? Was it health related? Was it business related? Was it school related? You know, everything is context.
Yeah. Which again,
city. Yeah, we did go ahead.
No, you're right. And I know we got to jump.
Yep.
But yeah, I guess to end it on that note, I think it's important it brings it back to context is understanding ourselves as well. And if you can't go into a situation with a blanket idea of how you're going to address every situation, a one size fits all approach, and really that means, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion, is from what I'm taking from what we talked about, is that we have to understand ourselves and also be emotionally present and be mindful enough to know how to address each situation uniquely.
And courageous. We didn't say that yet, right? I think we said it, but it was like courageous to have those conversations, to know that you might get a finger pointed at you, right?
Yeah.
You might have actually done something wrong that really hurt somebody. And
and be willing to hear it and hear their perspective and own up to it if you need to. And you know, this has been a great conversation, right?
Make it right.
Make it right. Exactly. So thank you so much for taking the time to jump on. And how can people find you if they'd like to find you, especially your consulting practice? Is there a website?
I can be found at www.andreanparker.com. Also info@andreanparker.com. My Instagram is anparker2011. Need to work on that. And I'm also on Twitter. I don't know what that handle is. And I'll hope to see you next year at this amazing PsyD program at William and James. I really hope to make that big decision, because I think it sounds amazing what you're learning and doing.
Ask me in like 3 months what I think, because right now I'm in the weeds of it. So I'm like, get away from this. I mean, I'm loving it. I love the program. It's the workload. I'm just adjusting.
I see. Are you working full time?
Yeah, but unfortunately I have an amazing team that's really stepped up with the understanding that this first semester is going to be rough for me. So I've taken a couple steps back, and my incredible team has stepped up to the plate.
Well, most of all, I don't know what you need to hear, and tell me if there's something you'd prefer to hear, but I want to wish you luck and joy and patience and grace with yourself on your recovery journey.
Oh, thank you.
Does that resonate?
It resonates as a human being, and it resonates in recovery as well. You know, it's been almost 11 years for me. So wow. I'm in a much better place. And as I used to recognize mostly with my recovery, it kind of became my identity in the beginning. You know, now I'm realizing it's just a small part of me and who I am. And I realize, I relate a lot more to just the general human experience these days.
I honestly feel like we're facing each other, and we're like looking into each other's eyes. Like, it does not feel like we're on two separate screens in two separate places.
That's what we want with this, right? Real conversation. So I want to thank everybody who checked this out and listened. It's going to be living on my LinkedIn page for quite a while, and then it'll be up as a podcast shortly, the next couple of weeks on all the different podcast platforms. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks so much. Take care. Thanks for tuning in.